The dogs won't bark. They're in the office with my wife, so we'll see.
Well, that's fantastic. I do appreciate you joining me. Even if your dogs do join us, it would be fine. My cat, well, she's not around here yet, but she'll jump up at some point because I record these in my bedroom. So it's real easy to do. It's where my big computer setup is. And because I live in a very small house, and it's interesting where you are, Taliesin West, where you work, typically at Taliesin West, there's some pretty small dwellings too. So, and then there's some expansive dwellings too. So there's small spaces. That's what I have at my house. So it makes the most sense for me to do it here. So actually, we've begun recording. So my guests will have joined us now for the Not Too Serious Architecture Hour. My name is Tim Totten, and I'm your host. And I'm joined in this great recorded interview with Jeff Goodman from the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. Jeff, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so before we get too far into it, I mean, some people will recognize your name already. Maybe they've read it in a magazine that they enjoy, quarterly magazine. They didn't know who that was. But before we get that far, we do have some 5 not too serious architecture questions that I like to start every conversation with. So they're meant to be spitfire pretty quick. Are you ready?
Okay, sure.
All right. Question number 4, who's your favorite architect?
Frank Lloyd Wright.
Okay, that's sort of a test one. We kind of make sure that I don't have to end the call right now. We don't have to end our conversation right away. That's a good answer, by the way. So question number 2, there are no specific order, as you can tell right now. You have spent quite a fair amount of time at Taliesin West there in Arizona. What's your favorite go-to corner when you're able to go hang out somewhere and just go enjoy a little bit of the space there on the campus?
I have several, and I take advantage of them as much as possible because I have that privilege. But if it's the summer and I'm in that summer mode right now, I'll go into the cabaret because it's a little bit underground. It's dark and it's nice and cool, so it helps me kind of like pretend I'm not in the middle of a hot Arizona summer.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and it is. Even the first time I visited was in August, which was probably the worst time to visit from a weather perspective. And it was so nice that you feel kind of like you're almost cave-like because of the stuff around you. That's really great. Question number 1 is the question white chocolate, dark chocolate, or milk chocolate?
I like them all, but probably milk chocolate would be the indulgence. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I don't want any of that, like, oh, it's healthy to eat dark chocolate. I like it, but I don't want to eat it then if you tell me it's healthy or good for me or whatever, Like, throw on the milk chocolate, All right. And then I don't know how many questions this is because I kind of make it up as I go along. Final question. Obviously, you're connected to Frank Lloyd Wright. That's one of the reasons why we're talking today. Other than the places where you've already worked or lived or been able to hang out, is there a structure or either a house or a building that you'd like to work in or live in of his that you haven't had a chance to visit yet?
Frank Lloyd Wright's that I haven't had a chance to visit yet?
Well, do you have never worked or stayed or lived in?
I'm very lucky that I get to visit a lot of Wright sites for work. The one I'm especially partial to Taliesin and Taliesin West because they're home. But Ennis House absolutely blew me away. Ennis House is the one that I just went into and I felt like I was in, whatever kind of a religious structure you want to call it. It just felt like a religious experience. So that's kind of the one that blew me away the most. And then the other way to answer it is, although I've been to and stayed in quite a number, there's really only one that I thought I could live here. And that's the Price House here in Arizona. That's one that I was just I could actually see this being my house.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So that's the Harold Price Senior House, the Grandma House, I think it's called.
Yep.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Hey, and I haven't been able to visit that yet. I've seen lots of great pictures, and word gets back from those who have how lovely it is. Now, are you an Arizona guy? Have you lived there your whole life, or is this a new thing?
I'm as close to a native as you can get without having been born here. I was born and raised in Kansas City, but I moved to Phoenix in 1994.
Okay, so
So
you've been here for quite a while
I've
now.
been here quite a long time. Yeah.
That's great. So, uh, what is your actual role with the foundation? What's the official title?
So I'm the Vice President of Communication and Partnerships for the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. That means I uh, work on the partnership level, creating new partnerships, but also trying to make the most of some of our existing partnerships, particularly those within the Frank Lloyd Wright ecosystem, kind of being our liaison to the other sites. And then in the communication role, I'm responsible for all of the marketing, advertising, communication that comes out from the foundation. So that consists of promoting every aspect of our work, whether it's tours, whether it's fundraising, membership, our retail store, our licensing program. I publish the Frank Lloyd Wright Quarterly magazine, and work on preservation and then beyond that, just Frank Lloyd Wright's general legacy. So I have a small team. We're down now, because of COVID. We're down now to 3, including myself. But we do a lot of work, and I kind of consider my job not so much traditional marketing and communication, but um, hear me out, I'll explain this. But I kind of look at myself as a type of preservationist too. We have Fred Perzillo as our Vice President of Preservation, and he oversees the preservation of Taliesin and Taliesin West. Ryan Houston's the Director of Preservation in Wisconsin, Emily Butler in Arizona, and they preserve the physical and, in a lot of cases, even the spiritual aspects of the buildings. I look at my job as kind of preserving the legacy. So, how do we make sure that this generation of Frank Lloyd Wright fans isn't the last generation of Frank Lloyd Wright fans? And how do we make sure that even this generation of Frank Lloyd Wright fans, expands from that tiny bubble into a much larger inclusive community of people who are inspired to live better lives from what they learned from this legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the work that I do in getting the word out is about preserving that legacy. And we do that by introducing the legacy to more fans and getting more people excited about it. And that's about not creating relevance. I actually don't want to say creating relevance, because Frank Lloyd Wright is relevant. I don't have to manufacture that.
Yeah.
What I have to do is find it and highlight it in targeted ways to specific audiences. Because there are people who don't think they're interested in architecture, but they love the environment, they love the outdoors. And so you can reach them, you bring them into the legacy by showing this deep connection between the built environment and the natural environment that they love so much. There are fans of art, there are fans of music, there's all kinds of different ways that people might not understand that Frank Lloyd Wright's life and work is relevant to their lives.
Yeah.
And my job is to make sure that they see it, and then to bring them deeper into the legacy once we make that introduction. So through that, I feel like my job is really preserving the legacy.
That's a really great way to look at what you're doing, because you really are, maybe instead of creating that relevance, you're helping to interpret that relevance or connect people to the relevance they don't know what is there already, and
Exactly.
and our world, even with COVID, in our sites every day now, we're recording this in September of 2020, that even with COVID in the forefront, we still live pretty fast lives, and we still have so much content pouring at us. There's so much available that being able to see that there's a connection or something you might be interested in really is, from your perspective, a job requires to create content, or at least curate content that people get, so that they can understand why that's important. And there's more content being created now than ever before. There are so many content
Right.
creators, and I imagine that much like you're doing right now, which is chatting with me, which takes it, of course, out to people who maybe already know who Frank Lloyd Wright is, but maybe we find some architecture fans who haven't thought about Wright's legacy and how it's still relevant, even though he died in 1959, that there's still things relevant to our culture and society today. So you have a pretty interesting interesting challenge that you have to do. What have you found is the best way recently to reach out to younger generations? And I asked that question knowing that I just earlier today did an interview with a young man who's 30, who's in interior design school, who is connected in the Wright world doing 3D modeling of Wright buildings, Jeff Tillemeyer. And it's interesting that he's the youngest person I've met lately who's interested in Frank Lloyd Wright. How is the foundation finding?
So you're just assuming I'm older than 30.
No, I'm assuming, actually, Jeff, I am assuming that you are. I haven't met any vice presidents that are that are 30. Yes, but I'm assuming your age, sir.
You assumed correctly. I'm well past your.
I'm also
earlier
older than 30, just so we're all okay. Yeah. So how are you reaching those? I didn't think he was 30 either. By the way, he looks quite young. But how are you reaching those college-age kids, or even younger? What is the foundation doing to find them?
So a couple of ways. I think, one, it's again that relevance, and we'll talk about, what we think they're interested in, and also where, we might not think they would be interested, but we find that we're wrong. But it's really about, capturing of the moment, to put it in Frank Lloyd Wright terms, everything is of the time and space. And so, a lot of the challenges that we have, he's already, explored ways to deal with them. And so, like, you were talking about right now being the time of COVID. I mean, I think what a lot of us are going through right now is feeling a lack of connection. We're staying home, we're staying in, we're not traveling, we're not going out to restaurants and doing things that we used to do. So we're missing those connections with our friends and in a lot of cases, our families. Even if we talk to them, we don't get to touch them, to hug them. We're missing connections with opportunities to be outdoors. That's especially true having still experiencing summer in Phoenix, where it's not a lot of outdoors right now. And, we're missing connections with like beauty out in the world, not being able to go to cultural sites, not being able to go to museums and theater and see live music and that kind of thing. And, that Wright's work was all about connection. And that's not just like the connection between the building and the landscape, or, integrating art into the space and pianos and, keeping music. It was also connection between people. The open concept. The open concept made it so, we could still communicate as a family unit, even when we were doing different functions in different spaces, because we weren't disconnected from each other by walls, right? And then creating the Taliesin community, and then other examples of community design like Broadacre City. Wright's really showing us a different way that we can interact and engage with each other as neighbors, as a community.
Yes,
And
almost
so,
constantly. I mean, that's actually a rather constant in his work. You're right. I think he also interestingly valued individual privacy, which kind of foreshadows how we do go to our homes and kind of stay in our little castle,
right.
or little cave too. So yeah, absolutely. He was definitely
Yeah.
very much about connecting community.
So there's all sorts of ways that, we can learn from this. And even during this time that we're staying at home, make some subtle or not so subtle changes to our lives to experience more beauty, more connection. It's a matter of, thinking about how your furniture is arranged, and like, why are my chairs where I sit and have coffee in the morning, facing inside the room when I have this beautiful window here that I can look out and see nature? That's a subtle shift that can, like, change your day and your mood and your outlook completely. I had a painting framed I took to the frame store, And the guy at the frame store said, I have to apologize. We're on a really long wait right now. We've never been so busy. And, he was suspecting, and I have the same suspicion, that people are at home and they're looking at their walls and going, God, it's so boring. What can I do? And so people are finding this as an opportunity to surround themselves with more beauty at home, to not have to go out into the world to experience beauty. So there's all these lessons that we can learn that will help improve our lives even in this current moment. So that applies to everyone. And to get back to your question, you were asking about younger generations. And, I think it's again, finding the things that they're passionate about and not manufacturing something about Wright's legacy, but showing it. So we've done a few things. We did an issue of the Frank Lloyd Wright Quarterly magazine last year called Timeless. And it focused on Wright's continuing relevance in contemporary pop culture. Like, why does his likeness and his work continue to show up from, the Khaleesi's palace and marine in Game of Thrones is inspired by the textile blockhouses in California, to Westworld, which actually uses the Millard House as part of its scenery. And so look at those two examples. With Game of Thrones, obviously, it's a fictional world, but it's a throwback to, ancient times. And they're using Frank Lloyd Wright design to represent what it might have looked like in ancient times. Now, you take Westworld, which is science fiction. It's our idea in the year 2019, 2020 of what the future 40 years from now might look like. Frank Lloyd Wright's work. And you see it popping up all over, whether it's science fiction or drama or whatever. Frank Lloyd Wright's work is there, and it just continues to show that not only is it appealing and exciting for people, but it's so timeless that it could be ancient times, it could be science fiction of the future. You have no way to know. So that issue really went in depth in exploring that. And then kind of tied into that, we started working with a gallery out of San Francisco and New York called Spoke Art. And last year we did a show called Frank Lloyd Wright Timeless, where these artists are pop culture artists. So they do a lot of movie posters, but these really high quality, cool, contemporary looking prints. And and by the way, if you don't know this, there's a huge subculture of people who are collectors of this type of art. And I've learned so much. There's all these acronyms and all kinds of stuff, but they typically, that work is typically focused around movies. They do a Wes Anderson show every year, which is how I initially learned about them, because I'm a huge Wes Anderson fan. And a Miyazaki show, or it'll be bands or films, that kind of thing. And so these artists took, their style and reinterpreted Frank Lloyd Wright works in the style of their art. It's hugely popular. We got a lot of press around it, and people were really excited to collect the posters, whether they were Frank Lloyd Wright fans who didn't really know this medium and they started collecting them, or the people who collect the posters that are normally about movies. They were super excited to see this. So it's that kind of thing that we're doing, which is just trying to tap into these different subcultures with different interests, and showing them the incredible legacy of Frank Lloyd Wright in doing that.
It strikes me that there's quite a bit of balance in your job probably required, because some of your job is to communicate with the community you already have.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of your job is to go find new people for that community. And that often means reaching outside of what people are used to for the Frank Lloyd Wright world, and so doing something like you just described sort of may sound counterintuitive to somebody who's been part of that Frank Lloyd Wright world for 20, 30, 40 years. but it's what's necessary to bring other people in, to expand, to increase the size of the tent, right? You know, to bring more people in, which is ultimately how the legacy continues.
Exactly. And I've had to really develop a thick skin, as I think. Is this going to be played just on the Right Attitude or beyond the Right Attitude?
No, it's available beyond our podcast.
Okay.
Available for
Good,
people
good.
anywhere who want to watch it. So yeah.
But I know, I'm sure you have a lot of viewers who are in the Right Attitude.
Oh,
So,
sure.
this is a Facebook page of some really wonderful people,
Yeah.
really great
Yeah.
people who are excited about Frank Lloyd Wright, and Stan Eklund, who runs it, calls it the deep end of the pool. But I've had to develop a thick skin, as I'm sure you've seen, because everybody tells me, what, not everybody, but I have a large chunk of people who tell me what they think I should be doing. And a lot of them want to tell me what they think I'm doing wrong. And I do things wrong, like, all the time. When I interviewed for this job, I said, like, the one thing I can guarantee you is I'm going to come up with a lot of really bad ideas. But in that, I'm also going to come up with several really good ones. So, there are people in the Frank Lloyd Wright ecosystem who actually don't really want to share the legacy with the rest of the world. And I don't mean that as a negative. I just mean that as, they deeply understand Frank Lloyd Wright's work. They've dedicated their lives, a chunk of their lives to, embodying the principles in Wright's work. And it's more than just a hobby or an interest. It's something that's, like, deeply a part of who they are and who they are in the world. And so it's very personal and in some ways private to them. And, some people don't feel like they want to share this legacy with others who aren't going to embody it as deeply as them, because, they're not going to get the same thing out of it. And I get that, but, I'm not going to revisit what we talked about already at the beginning, but, my job is to bring new people in. And I believe that it's the right thing to do. So, there are people.
There's always that tension, right? Between it's like, if you live in a really nice community, if you move to a nice community and then you start to recognize that too many people are moving in.
Yeah.
At which point was it okay to say, close the gates? Oh, well, we're here now. So I don't, so it's always people. I found a lot of times where I live, and I'm a transplant to where the community I live in, I try to never get annoyed with new people, because it's like, well, I was new once too. And the legacy of Wright is always changing. I know that when I first started paying attention to Frank Lloyd Wright in the late 80s, early 90s, there wasn't a community built the way there is now. Obviously, there were things already that had been continued since his death, but I didn't have a fan club I could go join necessarily as easily. There weren't online communities because there wasn't as much online at the time. And there wasn't a way for me to so easily and readily access his legacy the way there is now. There's so much more in terms of, even just since 1993 when I graduated high school, there's so much more in terms of books available and movies and videos and, all of those productions, and now podcasts and YouTube clips and whatever else, that I think it makes sense that some people are sort of feeling, well, wait, I stumbled upon him and found all these details,
Right.
And now there's a line of coasters. I mean, like, I can.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that metaphor is right on. It's, if you do that neighborhood metaphor, it's almost like what I'm doing is gentrification. I'm coming in and trying to gentrify the neighborhood, and in fairness, it is what I'm doing. I'm making this legacy more accessible to more people. And so I'm trying to say that with a certain amount of compassion, that
Sure.
I understand why it's difficult for people. But at the same time, there are also people, I mean, I'm sure you know this, there are people who believe they're the only living human who can tell you exactly what Frank Lloyd Wright would have wanted about any particular subject. And if there's one thing I know about myself, it's that I have no idea what Frank Lloyd Wright would have wanted to do in any particular circumstances. The man was a genius. The man was constantly growing and learning and evolving. I mean, look at the way his work changed over his lifetime. There's no way we can know 60 years after his death, you know, how he would have been responding to, you know, current technology, current materials, current codes, and everything else. I mean, there's just no way I can know that. I'm not the genius that he was. Let me tell you a story. This is kind of my hazing for this job, although it wasn't meant to be a hazing. When I first started, I was up in Wisconsin at Taliesin for the first time, getting to know the people up there and getting to know the site up there. And I was like a couple of weeks into the job. And I had just made the decision to change the Twitter handle for the foundation, which at the time I started, the Twitter handle was at FLLWFNDTN, which, like, if you don't know any better, would just look like somebody slammed their hands down on the keyboards, right? So I changed it to at Wright Taliesin. And I had someone look at me with a straight face after I did that and say, that is not what Mr. Wright would have wanted our Twitter handle to be. And I was like, oh my God, like, that's what's going on here. Like, and so first of all, I don't know what Frank Lloyd Wright would have wanted our Twitter handle to be.
Right. Yeah.
And second of all,
I would trust anybody that would think they knew that. Yeah.
Yeah. And second of all, like, it's not his decision, it's mine. You know, I have to take ownership of this job and do what I think is the right thing to do. I mean, in collaboration with all of my colleagues. Right. But, you know, if I try to make every decision that I have to make with a Ouija board, you know, trying to, you know, conjure up what Frank Lloyd Wright would have thought, I'd never get anything done. So, you know, I'm not the genius he was, but hopefully I'm smart enough and good enough at my job to do some things right.
You know, the only thing I am convinced that if Wright were alive today, he would indeed have his own Twitter account, probably to rival the president's, because I think he would have used, from evidence of seeing the way that he used other media, I don't think that Wright would have shied away from using current media to reach people, because he used
and to develop his brand. I mean, he was a master of brand identity.
And to that point, I think he might have changed his Twitter handle 20 times if he had one. Like, you know, Wright doesn't strike me as the kind of person who was afraid to change things and try things new. You just have to look at the history of the renovation history of either Taliesin to know how often he would tear something down and change it and make it different.
Yeah.
So saying that Wright would not have wanted that as a Twitter handle seems a little strange, just because, if anything, I just imagine he would have embraced the malleability, the ability to sit anywhere and share your ideas with the whole world. I mean, that I can't imagine anyone who would have possibly you know, grabbed onto that quicker and would have really.
The only problem is he'd have a little bit of a trouble with the character restraints.
Yo, oh my goodness, that's so true. That's so true. Absolutely. Well, you know, now there's a few more. You went from 140 or whatever to 280 or whatever.
Yeah,
So maybe you'd be a little happier now. You know, that really brings me to another great question, which is, you know, part of the communication is, of course, your social media outlook and all of those sort of things, staying connected with people that are already part of it. You know, and from that, though, is you kind of get us into we get into the 24 hours of not only news coverage, but sort of like the expectation that there's weekly or daily content. You know, you are talking about a legacy that does stretch, you know, far beyond his living years. But how do you keep that fresh and new, considering that the man himself passed away 60 plus years ago?
Well, you know, I'm 4.5 years into this job, and it's hard. I mean, it's really hard. We publish 4 magazines a year too. And, you know, that's been happening since I think around 1990. And, you know, we don't want to duplicate, you know, themes and topics in the magazine too much. But I think there's a couple of things. One, we're building new audiences like we talked about before. So we're going to have to go back and revisit topics that we visited in the past because we have new people who didn't experience it the first time around. And you know, we want to make sure that they get the important relevant content as well. And then I think beyond that, there's finding new angles to look at things. I think this is not content that I created or the foundation, but Brian Hannon just wrote a new article that he published online about Broadacre City and how relevant it is to how we're living during coronavirus. So, you know, I think that's an example of a topic like Broadacre City, which those who, you know, have been around the right ecosystem for a while, they've read about it and they've read about it and they've read about it. But why is it still relevant? You know, why is it relevant to this particular moment? So, you know, we can revisit things and look at them in new ways. And then, you know, there's a lot, I mean, this legacy is so vast that, you know, there are things that believe it or not, in, you know, 150 plus years of Wright's existence, we haven't explored them. And that's one thing that we've been doing with the quarterly magazine is focusing on some of the unbuilt work. So this will be the third year in a row for the fourth quarter issue. We're partnering with the Spanish architect named David Romero, who creates these photorealistic renderings that, you know, you're looking at photos of buildings that never existed.
Yeah.
And really allowing us to figure out, if they had been built, what might that experience have been, and what might we have learned? You know, you go to Taliesin West, and you know, everything you interact with there teaches you something, and that's true of all the different Wright sites. And they teach you different things, or they teach you the same thing in different ways. So you know, the first issue we did a couple of years ago on this, the Gordon Strong automobile objective was on the cover. You know, we never got to experience it, but what would we have learned if we had? So that the cover project on the one coming out in December is going to be the Oasis, which was Wright's design for the Arizona Capitol building. And it's very cool.
Oh my goodness. Can you imagine had that building actually been created? What kind of a stir, what connection that would have made into the architecture community? I'm fascinated by that project because I don't think we understand the scope of it, how big it would have been. Even looking at models, I don't think we really get the idea of how just monumental and different, and so different compared to what they actually built.
Right. So you're going to get to see, air quotes, photographs of them in the December issue.
You know, it's funny. I in some of my presentations about Wright's life and work, when I do my storytelling sessions, if I'm doing a longer version, and I have a 3-hour version that I do, is 3 1-hour sessions that we do over a couple weeks with an audience that's able. We're not doing them lately, obviously, but I've done them in the past with libraries and other groups, museums, and I always say, you know, and then Wright designed pro bono this you know, amazing building for the Arizona Capitol, and I go through some pretty decent images that have been created for it, and then I say, and this is what they built instead, and everyone just goes, oh, they're just like, it's the sound is so bad, and it's so funny because a lot of them aren't coming for architecture. It's one of the things that I really am interested to ask you about is balancing the life and work aspects of Wright's legacy, and part of that is I sort of contend that one of the reasons that people come to see me give talks about Wright's life and work is that we all like a good ripping yarn. You know, we like a great story that, and for me, Wright's life, his work, of course, but Wright's life has all of those great Shakespearean elements. You know, we've got disaster, and we've got love and romance, and you know, adultery. I always tell the people it's got love, adultery,
ego,
and the Emperor of Japan. It's got all those great things in it, right? And I contend that the reason that people can even mention the name Frank Lloyd Wright, if you ask Americans, most Americans, to name an architect, if they can name one at all, it's Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, it's a testament to the work that you're doing there with the foundation, but it also fits really the fact that he lived a life that is remarkable, and not always for the best reasons, but of course his legacy has remarkable aspects to it. And I also tell people that had he been an accountant, we would just think he was, some of his personal stories wouldn't be all that interesting, and we might not like him very much as a person, but he was also this architectural genius who was thinking about the way we're going to live and experience the world, which is much bigger than just he built some buildings, So part of my question for you is, how do you manage those parts of it? I think of myself as almost like a gateway drug to architecture, to his work. I tell people these stories that maybe their book club read Loving Frank, and they're just fascinated by this person they read about. And then they come to one of my presentations and go, oh, he did all that stuff too, and designed those amazing things and thought this way and pushed us into this 21st century idea of living. So how do you manage that in your role, not just the work, but also the life legacy?
So let me answer this in a couple of ways. So first, Frank Lloyd Wright was so much more than an architect. So much more than an architect of buildings. We have a board member, Michael Desmond, who's an architect and architectural historian at LSU. And he talks a lot about what Frank Lloyd Wright created was an architecture for living. So, and that's not meaning like creating the buildings for living, but like he showed us a better way to live. And so that's really, that's really it. And it's, it's showing all of that. And it's showing, when Frank Lloyd Wright, said, here's where the furniture needs to be, here's the art on the walls, here's the dress you need to wear to the housewarming party, all of that. It wasn't about it wasn't about ego. It wasn't about being controlling or manipulative. It was about saying, here's the way to get the best out of life. And so, it means showing and talking about more than just the buildings. It's about talking about the art. It's about talking about the landscape. It's about talking about how the buildings are used. All of this is part of this architecture for living. And if we're only talking about the buildings, then we're doing his legacy a great disservice, because we're only talking about just a fraction of what he taught us and what he left us. The other thing I'll say is, there are different approaches to how we should talk about Frank Lloyd Wright, and especially how we, as the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, which was the organization that he started himself in 1940, really the legacy organization of his life and career, how much reverence do we have to have for him when we speak of him? You'll notice that I don't say, when I'm talking, I don't say Mr. Wright, which in some circles is really like a sin. But what I really believe is, if we humanize him, if we make sure to show the whole human that he was, flaws and all, and there are plenty of flaws there, then that makes his work even more incredible. Because when you put him up on a pedestal and you say, Frank Lloyd Wright, world's greatest architect, well, what's the job description of the world's greatest architect? Like, of course you're going to design the Guggenheim and design Falling Water. Like, that's what the world's greatest architect is supposed to do. But if you start thinking about him as this man, a husband, a father, a friend, an enemy, a person who had flaws and feelings and passion. And then you think, oh my God, how did he do all this stuff? Like, how does a human like come up with all of this and in a way that makes so much sense? I mean, walking into the Ennis house, like I said before, is like, how is this possible? And we're not talking about like this deity that created, we're talking about a human being who just like worked at a higher plane than we can imagine, but created it. And so, in that respect, I think really like delving into the humanity makes his life and his work so much richer, so much more impressive.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like most about sharing his life story. First of all, I think it's more interesting to talk about architecture when there's a human scale to it. There has to be a human scale to what he did, that he wasn't just working in a bubble or in some, a sterile environment. This was a man who was doing all this against the backdrop of the difficulties of his life, against the backdrop of people so close to him dying horrifically, of the depression. We have to look at, I'm thinking about what's going to happen in 20 years when we look back at the things that were accomplished during COVID-19. The way it completely changed some people's lives and careers, 100%. I have friends who have had their entire life twisted 180 degrees, and they're off in a direction they had not expected to be in because of the change. And it makes him far more human to me when we recognize that he had character flaws, that we're not talking about a perfect person. We're talking about, we're not getting sort of these dictates from somebody who never had any troubles telling us how to live. We got a human being. It's why I love to interview people that actually met him and talk to them about their own experiences, because they share a very human person. And just listening to them talk, we don't get what we get in a lot of books, which is sort of that Frank Lloyd Wright told his clients this is how it had to be and they couldn't do it any way different. And you hear from those who actually hired him and they go, oh no, absolutely. He was very generous. I mean, he really encouraged us to do it the way that he wanted, but because he knew it was the right plan. And when we did it the way he wanted, it turned out he was right. You can read that from quite a few people. So that's why I'm always fascinated to hear from people who are protecting his legacy and pushing it forward. It's nice to hear that it's not about ignoring that his personal life happened. Was the impetus for his work as well. I mean, those things are intertwined, right?
Yeah, so I've developed a really good friendship over the last 4 years with Vern Swabak, who was Frank Lloyd Wright's youngest apprentice. He joined the fellowship in, I believe, 1957 at the age of 17. And he lives here in Arizona. He's an architect in Scottsdale. And he and I talk several times a week. He calls me a lot. And, every time I talk to him, he says, did I ever tell you about, and then I cut him off and I say yes, because he always has already. I hear his, but I don't care. Like, I want to hear them over and over and over again. Or sometimes I'll cut him off and I'll just finish the story for him. But, being able to have that direct connection to, people who knew him and loved him, really helps me in that mission that I have of humanizing him.
Oh, absolutely.
I remember the first time, actually, I think I've only seen it once. I remember when I saw the movie Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis. Like, of course I knew about Lincoln, and like I understood intellectually that he was a real person and not just a figure in history. But watching that movie, it's like I had this moment where it's like, oh my God, this guy was real. And that's really what I want to do, is I want people to just like understand that this was a real person. And having those relationships and those conversations, like you were saying, it really helps me to do it.
So that brings up a great question that I've had for a long time. And now that I have you being recorded, you don't have to answer this question because you may not know the answer. When's the movie coming out? When are we getting some big name Hollywood actor playing Frank Lloyd Wright and telling us his life story? And I don't mean like some adaptation of The Fountainhead or anything like that. Like,
Right.
Is there interest in creating the Frank Lloyd Wright story as a biopic in that way that actually, or a biopic that shows us the man as a human being and lets us connect with him?
The short answer to that is I don't know. The longer, or the not as short answer to that is I know there's definitely interest. The foundation does own, the intellectual property for Wright, including his name and his likeness. And so, you know, our participation in that would be, you know, would be contingent on being comfortable with the way it's being presented. But I can assure you that the leadership at the foundation right now is not trying to, you know, wouldn't want to just make it into a fairy tale where, you know, everything's perfect. Like we would want to tell the story the right way. But I know there's interest. It's just a matter of when the time and place is right.
That makes sense. And obviously, you know, Wright is Frank Lloyd Wright is written about quite often. I mean, there seems to be a new book every, I wouldn't say every couple of weeks, but you know, there's new books every year, and people still mining the things to write about. Is there anything particular in the last couple of years that you've really surprised you that was able to be developed that had not yet been revealed, or some new amazing thing you hadn't realized was, oh my goodness, this is something we have never discussed?
Well, so I'll answer that question, but before I do, I want to go back to the last topic and ask you, when you're thinking about this this movie,
Yeah.
who's the actor that you picture?
It's so hard to think of any. It's so difficult because, you know, part of it is you have to recognize that Frank Lloyd Wright's life story is so enormous. You know, I mean, we're talking about 70 plus years of a career and life that I think would be really relevant to share. So, you know, part of me thinks, you know, what part of his life story do you tell? And for me,
Right.
I'm really focused on he gets to Chicago at what, 18, 19, somewhere in there, and he makes it through he makes it through designing Falling Water. So for me, that's sort of that's once he gets to Falling Water and S.E. Johnson in the mid 1930s, I think after that, the story arc for a movie is kind of over, because it's sort of success after that. You know what I mean? There are little things to share, but to me, the problem you set up is, can he restart his relevance in the teens and 20s and kickstart it? And so you kind of show how he got to that point, and then you got to show how he sort of fixed his life. So from that period, you know, you kind of want somebody in their 40s, 50s, somewhere in that age. So there's a lot of people. I mean, if not that he looks like Frank Lloyd Wright, but if Philip Seymour Hoffman were still alive, I think he'd have the acting ability. I don't know who else. I can't think of a.
Well, I'm the right age, and I might mention I'm also the right height. So just throwing that out there.
Oh, okay. Well, have you thought about trying to be Frank Lloyd Wright? To me, it's got to be a name. Not that you're not a lovely name, Jeff, but it's got to be a named actor that can bring that, like, oh, you know, so and so is playing. Like if Leonardo DiCaprio decides in a couple of years that he wants to play,
like Daniel Day-Lewis doing Lincoln. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see that getting it greenlit. Obviously, you know, and Brad Pitt, been a big fan of Frank Lloyd Wright for a long time, so. You know, I know people have talked before about maybe Brad Pitt will make the movie one day, but you know, I don't know if he fits the look.
Yeah. So okay, so I that was an interjection before I answered the other question, and things that maybe have surprised me, like different takes on it. So a couple of things. One was it was never released in the US, but I know some people got their hands on a YouTube piracy of it. But the BBC did a documentary in 2017, the 150th anniversary of Wright's birth year, and that was a Welsh production company that came out and did it, and it was a Welsh architect who was the host. And I think that kind of connection that they brought to Wright's past was super interesting, and they just did a really, really killer job with that documentary.
It was beautiful. And I like it was very connected. I like the way they connected the parts to each other.
Yeah. So that's one. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that jumps out at me. I mean, you know, I think there's been a lot in the artistic world, you know, the show that we've been doing that I alluded to before, that, you know, takes an a different type of look at rights work. Um, and then some of the stuff that we've been doing within the right sites, the group of right sites around the country, I think has been an interesting take. Right now we're doing this kind of second generation of what we call right virtual visits, which, the first round was just two sites swapping videos that they recorded of their sites. Now we're doing it where two sites will go live, kind of like we are now, side by side from those sites, and explore a theme. We just did one this morning with Taliesin in Wisconsin, next to the Westcott House. And we did another one with Taliesin West and Unity Temple. And what that is us learning these new technologies super, super fast because of COVID. Like you were saying before, we've advanced a couple of years technologically in a few months. But taking advantage of that technology to explore rights work in a different way. I mean, we did one from the drafting studio at Taliesin West and the drafting studio at Taliesin side by side, and like live, so people they could interact with each other, interact with the audience, and we've never been able to do that before. Like experience these two things at the same time and compare and contrast. So that's another thing that we've been doing that I think is super exciting.
Yeah, that level of access is amazing, and I don't think I hesitate to think that would have been even considered in the past. That anyone would have said, "Wouldn't this be great if we actually had a live side by side?" In the past, I could have visited each and observed them, but I would have been
hold it in your memory and try to go there. But this is side by side.
It's certainly one of the things I've really enjoyed about. I would not have launched this podcast if it hadn't been for having a bunch of extra time because of COVID. And I said to myself, well, gosh, I can't take people on tours, and we're not going to run people through our architecture travel companion business right now. But I could kind of go see people. And, Jeff, even though we've met in person and we've had a little bit of time together, I'm not just going to jump on a plane and fly to Phoenix anyway. So this technology is helpful, but I would have had to do this anyway. The people who are going to watch this can't really go talk to you all in person right away anyway. Mm-hmm. So to get this interview, we would have always kind of done it this way, but right now has given me an impetus to start it, to do it, and say, hey, let's start to record some of this stuff and talk about how people are connected, and hear what they're doing and what's coming up and how we can assist each other, but also how is the legacy managed? How is that brought to the rest of the world? So, I mean, I think this is we see how COVID's giving us that opportunity, but also sometimes you need a kick in the pants, to figure out where else you're going. But it does bring up the question of, the foundation, Taliesin in Wisconsin has reopened for tours in a bit of a limited way, but it's reopened, and I've been there and visited since then. The foundation Taliesin West in Arizona is still closed, but you do anticipate at some point that there will be a way to get back into, not only for people to visit, but other ways to create programming and things to
exactly. Yeah, we hope to announce a reopening soon. I'm not ready to do it just yet, but I mean, listen, these buildings are not the buildings without life in them.
Yeah.
And so until we get people back in them, that's part of preservation. Like, they have to be experienced, they have to have life in them. So we're going to be getting back to that soon. But I really appreciate the question, because I feel a big responsibility. I have this extraordinary privilege in life of getting to experience these sites intimately. I don't know how I ended up here, but for whatever reason, I did, and I get to go to my office at Taliesin West. I get to go to Taliesin and stay at the house. I get to travel and see all these sites around the country, and really, get to have a profound experience of rights work. And that's a privilege that I get. And I feel very strongly that it's my responsibility to share that privilege with as many people as possible. And, so obviously inviting people to experience the sites in person is the best way to provide that privilege. But, the technology has made it so, I can share more of this with more people quite easily. And, I want it to be more than, look at this amazing building that you may have seen a photo of before, but like, this cactus is blooming. Here's something that I saw today differently that really moved me. And I see Taliesin West differently every day. And so, it would be too selfish to keep this privilege to myself. Fortunately, sharing the privilege is also my job. So, that works out. But no, I want to share this with the world because it makes my life better. It enriches my life in so many ways. And we didn't get to all the questions we talked about before, like, what brought me to nonprofit, but I've been in nonprofit almost my entire career, with a brief interlude at an ad agency, which we don't need to go into now, but like, I can only do a job if it's something that I really, truly believe in. That's the only way I'm going to be happy. And, I really, truly believe that sharing the Frank Lloyd Wright legacy with the world will make people's lives better, will make the world better, will help people be not only happier, but healthier people, more connected with the world and the community around them in a way that, improves lives for everyone. So, that's why I get out of bed every day and do this job. It's an honor. I mean, it's really an honor for me to get to be a part of the legacy in this way.
Well, your job is to help continue that legacy and bring it to other people. And it's pretty obvious to me that if you can keep those ideals in your mind, that you will continue to do that. I really appreciate you continuing Wright's legacy and sharing it with so many other people. I know you'll have a lot of great announcements coming up from the foundation of new programs being created, new ways for people to interact. In the meantime, while we can't yet come back and visit, I'm so glad that you're doing the virtual stuff. And I'm glad that you were able to join us today on the Not Too Serious Architecture Hour.
And I'll just put in a final little plug here to keep track of our announcements and what we're doing at franklloydwright.org. And I would also say, we've all been really hampered by this global crisis, and the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation is no different. I mean, we closed Taliesin West right during what would have been our busiest season, lost out on a significant amount of revenue, offered a lot of these virtual experiences free of charge because it's important to share the legacy with the world. So anyway, that's my not so subtle way in this not so serious architecture hour to say any type of support is appreciated, whether it's a donation, becoming a member, and then you get those magazines that I work so hard on, or shopping in our store. All of this helps us preserve Taliesin West, and Wright's legacy. So if you would visit franklloydwright.org, you can learn more, and we greatly appreciate any support.
Absolutely, and I encourage everyone that if you're already a member, even if you've got those things handled, you've already done all that. When they open up tickets for tours again, go ahead and buy some tickets for 6 months, 8 months from now. Most sites are kind enough to let you change those tickets if you have to, but go ahead and send the money to them. Get a ticket purchased, make a plan, even if you don't know exactly when you're going to go. I've talked to a number of sites who said, we do get that money right away. We don't have to fulfill it till later, but go ahead and buy next year's tour tickets in advance. And I think when we can do that, or even just make a donation, but if you want something in your hand from it, that's a really good idea. And you get those great magazines if you join, and that's such a big amount of content. I mean, I know I have an entire shelf of the quarterlies, and I so look forward to it. My cat is really excited to join you. So we can find out more by following you on Twitter and Facebook and all the other places, but also through franklloydwright.org. I'm sorry, is it?
Yeah, you got it, franklloydwright.org.
My guest today has been Jeff Goodman. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure we'll see you on a future podcast in the future.
I hope so.
Thanks.